Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is, on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 41 of Breaking Step. Are you sure about this? Tibs asked Jackal as he lit a lantern. The light hinted at a large space. The fighter shrugged. As much as I can be without a network in town anymore. My father's people might have been more trouble than they were worth in the end, but at least I could get them to do stuff for me. I mean having you and Krosef here. Tibs stepped into the darkness, using the metal he sensed to find the next lantern. I don't know how I'm going to be when I channel metal. At the very least, I'm going to be sharp and pointy. He could sense all of them and light. He could sense all of them and have lit them from the entrance, but he needed to do something while he worked up the courage to start. I'm not worried, Joseph said, as Tibbs lit another lantern. You aren't going to hurt us. And if you try, Jekyll said, smirking, I'll stop you. Was that him admitting he had survived Tibbs's attempt at killing him by careful planning? Or was that him admitting he had survived Tibbs's attempt at killing him by careful planning? He should stop worrying himself sick over it and ask. But what if it was just Jackal's usual, not always justified bravado? It would be simple to replace a reserve in his bracers with metal essence and limit himself to that. It gave him enough to deal with any problem if he couldn't just pull the essence from around him, and he had so many elements to use, to master the use of. He could focus on them before this one. Tibbs? Krosef asked. He nodded and moved away from the lantern he stood before, unmoving, and continued lighting them until he stood in a space that was more shadows instead of darkness. That was now more shadows instead of darkness. He could fill it with light, but he didn't know how to have that remain without constantly thinking about it. There had to be an arcanist that let that happen, maybe even a simple weave. Making a light that stayed had to be one of the first thing a runner with light as their element learned. Yet one more thing he needed to work on. He stepped into the middle of the room, but for now, it was metal. He nodded again, and Jackal stoned up. Tibbs let out a breath and channeled metal, then waited for something to happen. How do you feel? Joseph asked in the stretching silence. Fine. Tibbs tried to find a difference in how he thought. Nothing changed? Jekyll asked, his tone suspicious and on guard. Of course he was weary. Tibbs had tried to fool them when he channeled corruption. Nothing that I can feel. Maybe I already think like metal? I doubt it, the fighter replied, not relaxing. You channeled it in the dungeon and you were more intense. It was in the middle of a fight, Tibbs replied dismissively, and I didn't know what I'd done. No, Tibbs, it wasn't the same kind of intensity as when you fight. It was. Tibbs snapped, fixing his gaze on Jackal. I know how I feel better than you, don't you think? There it is. Tibbs rolled his eyes. Jackal knew nothing. Well, nothing about this. He pushed the essence over his hand and sensed the cloud. Then he made a blade from it. He ground his teeth as what he produced was similar to his ice sword in that it was spiked and jagged, but where his ice looked like it grew, looked to grow, but where with ice it looked like they grew out of the weapon. This looked like broken pieces put together without reason. He didn't mind the jaggedness, considered it sort of his thing at this point. But this was ugly. This wasn't a sword, just something broken he'd picked up. He undid it and tried again. This was a new element, and he'd worked out that what he did with one didn't always produce the same result with another. Again, he produced nothing more than broken metal held in place by his will. All right? Since it was his will, he was going to will this thing the way he wanted it. He willed the pieces to move, to align, to give him a sword. Instead, they stretched in all directions, piercing other pieces, breaking them so that he ended up with a larger mess of broken pieces. With a snarl, he sent the pieces flying. Maybe there had been something wrong with the essence. Maybe he'd pull some of another element without meaning to. Metal wouldn't look like that by itself. The essence pulled before him, and he grasped a smooth hill as the rest of the sword formed, and he smiled. The rest was a mess of broken pieces. Tibs, Jekyll called. I'll get this. Jekyll stood before Khrushchev with metal shards embedded in the wall around him, but his clothing was undamaged. The fighter chuckled nervously. Maybe you aren't ready for swords just yet? Why don't you try something simpler, like coins? Can you make copper? No, silver coins. How about... I said, Tibbs replied to Crunch Chief, swinging his hand at the fighter's direction, that I'm going to get this. The pieces of metal came undone and flew in the fighter's direction. Abyss! Tibbs cursed and Jekyll tensed. He hadn't willed the metal to do that. It had just slipped his control. How dare it do that? He controlled it. He formed another sword as Jekyll hurriedly checked himself over for damage. You missed? Tibbs rolled his eyes. He couldn't have missed because he wasn't aiming. If he had aimed, there would have been nothing left of what he hit. I told you, Khrushchev said, he won't hurt us. He glared at the wreck of metal that tried to pass itself off as a sword. Why won't you do what I want? What do you want? Khrushchev asked. Maybe you should stay behind me, Crow. A sword, he told the approaching server. What else do you think I'd want out of this? He ground his teeth as this time the broken pieces slid against each other instead of assembling into a fucking sword. Why? Khrushchev was next to him now. Because it's what I want. It might be easier to start with a knife. I want a sword. He glared at Khrushchev, and the pieces slipped his control, returning to looking like an even messier thing. With an exasperated scream, he threw the mess at the back of the warehouse and formed another sword. This time he'd get it to behave. Not one word, he warned the server as another mess of broken pieces formed. How do you feel about a few dozens of them? So long as they aren't comments on what I'm doing. What are you doing? Making a sword. Can't you see that? Khrushchev nodded. Because you want a sword. Yes, an abyss. An abyss take this thing. I will get one. Why do you think it looks like that? Because I'm angry. That one was easy. It's the same with ice. Alistair says because deep down I'm angry. It's reflected in what I make. Tibs snorted. Like he has any idea how fucking angry I am. Him and his fucking guild. Anytime I channel fire, it's a struggle not to use it on them. Even if I know it won't do anything and all the magic protecting the building. Do you think getting more angry is helping you get the sword to look how you want? I don't care! Tibs snapped. It's my essence. It's going to fucking do what I will it to. Can I make a suggestion? No, I've got this. Maybe you should take a break, Tibs. I said I have this. He had the mess of broken pieces in the server's face, and Jekyll pulled his man away. Khrushchev hadn't looked worried. Tibs, Jekyll warned. I'm not going to hurt him. Tibs replied dismissively, focusing on the mess again. It's okay, Khrushchev said. I really don't know about this, Crow. I think I understand how he's thinking. He's turned stubborn, Jekyll said. No, he's unbending in his thinking, which is interesting if you think about it, since metal is flexible when it's well forged. Khrushchev was next to him again. I don't want to hear it, Tibs said. That's unfortunate, Tibs, because I'd like you to let go of the element. I've got this, he said through gritted teeth as metal silently slid against metal. Maybe, but I want you to let it go anyway. I'm doing this. No, you're not. Tibs glared at Jekyll's man. You're getting close to making me want to hurt you, Khrushchev. What is this about, Tibs? Making a fucking sword! No, it's not. Look at this, Tibs snarled as he shook the mess in his hand. But that isn't why you came here, is it? Who cares about that? He ignored the server's gaze on him. He was just a distraction from getting metal to obey him. He tried to will the pieces into a line. I didn't think you'd lose focus that easily, Khrushchev said. What did you say? Tibs only had one piece left in his hand, the others clattering to the floor. That didn't matter. He didn't need a sword to cut this man. All the pieces were sharp enough for that. Tibs stepped forward, but Khrushchev stopped him with a raised hand. You got distracted from the reason you came here. Khrushchev watched him, and easily, too. I don't get distracted, Tibs snarled, unless someone causes it, like you. Really? Then how about you tell me why we came here? Tibs raised the broken piece of metal, the broken piece he held. One of the reason behind every... No. The reason behind everything he'd done in the last... He frowned at it. Was it? It was what he'd wanted to deal with, what he wanted to deal with right now. But had it been the reason he, Jekyll, and Khrushchev had come here? No. They'd come here to find out how metal would affect him. I get obsessed, he said. I don't want to think about anything other than what I'm dealing with right now. I don't care about the consequences, of course. He smiled at the realization, then that went away as he noticed the broken pieces of metal in his hand and the need to get the sword to do as he willed. He let go of metal, then absorbed the piece in his hand, emptying earth out of his bracers to make space for it. This is going to be a problem until I get control. Seems like you got control easily enough, Jekyll said, his skin regaining its tan. I didn't get control of metal, I just let go of it. It happened faster than with the other elements, Khrushchev commented. It was easier to notice I wasn't thinking the same once you forced me to look at it. I think it's because I had to do the same thing with the other elements. I'm learning to understand how I'm different when I channel an element, if I can get myself to pay attention to that. He smiled. Maybe I'll get to the point where I can get a new element and not have to destroy a building to gain control. Considering the state you left the previous one, Jekyll said, indicating the shards embedded in the wall by the door, I'd say this is good, but I can't control myself yet. Do you want to channel metal again? Khrushchev asked. Tibs shook his head. I need to rest. Then you might want to absorb everything you sent flying in the walls. Tibs sensed the shard in the walls and at his feet. He undid them, making them only essence again. He put the little that fit the reserve in his bracers and let go of the rest. He'd have to channel metal again to bring this back into his core reserve, and he didn't feel like risking it. Is it safe for Tibs to train here again? Khrushchev asked as Tibs cracked the door open and listened. It's best to avoid using the same place twice. The owner might miss the holes, or not question where they came from, but any more, and they're going to get the guards to watch the building. The lack of sound confirmed what his sense told him. Tibs opened the door a bit more and looked out. Don't you just know if there's someone there? Jekyll asked. I have to stop relying on only one sense. He pulled the door fully open. There's going to be magic out there that can fool it. It's not like anyone knows you do it. There are still ways. He exited the building. Comdar can hide completely from me with darkness now. But he knows about your element, Khrushchev said. Any rogue who thinks he can't be beaten is about to end up dead, Tibs replied. I'm not dying because of that one. That's Tibs, Jekyll said, following him, wise beyond his years. Tibs walked along the guild corridor, acting like he knew where he was going. He did. He was going to the training room where Alistair would be waiting for him soon, but he was taking the very long way to get there. He'd never been in this part of the building. It had to take two corridors to take 2 corridors to their turn, and then had come across another one going deeper. He had been looking for it because he could now tell the previous ones didn't reach the back. The clerks he passed seemed too preoccupied with the stacks of papers to notice them, so he made sure not to get in their way. When the door opened, he got a flash of essence from inside, which vanished as soon as the door closed. All he had time to make out was that the essence was woven. Was this where the enchanted items still put in the loot ended up? What did the guild do with them? What could he do with them if he could make it in one of those rooms without being noticed? What are you doing here? Tibs didn't have to act startled as he spun. The clerk was looking at him, water blue eyes severe. I think I'm lost. How did you make it here? He trailed off, looking where he'd come from, then the direction he had been heading in. I don't know. And where are you trying to go? There was clear suspicion in the man's voice. The training rooms. Tibs looked around again. I made a turn because I thought I'd seen a gem on the floor, but it was just broken crystal. Then I headed right for the training hall, but he looked around again. This doesn't look like it. No, it certainly doesn't. The suspicions didn't entirely leave the man's blue eyes, but he turned. Come, I'll lead you back. They made it to the training room as Alistair arrived. His teacher raised an eyebrow, then shook his head in amusement. Why am I not surprised? The clerk said before leaving. Why doesn't Duke do anything with darkness? Tibs asked once the door was closed and before Alistair started on the lesson. How do you know it doesn't? With a flick of the wrist, essence assembled in the center of the room, a mix of weaving and etching. Or maybe it was a different type of weave that included etching. The more Tibs perceived and thought he understood, the more he found he didn't. Comdar told me. Tibs had tried. He'd tried using the etching he knew with darkness to see what, if anything, would happen, and Do hadn't changed anything, just like Moore didn't interact with water. I don't know. The water took the form of a person, a watery version of Stowe's people golem, only with fewer detail as the water kept moving. You should have realized by now that if it's outside our element, I know little of it. Then why doesn't Moore do anything with water? The look on Alistair's face was shock, then amusement. You are determined not to do things as they are expected, aren't you? Tib shrugged. I don't know why. It simply doesn't act on a water etching. You didn't ask someone? You can go anywhere you want. You have coins to get whatever you want. Why don't you ask those who know stuff about everything there is? It's what I'd do if I had as many coins as you. It's what he would have done with all the coins from the sale of the corruption pool if he hadn't had so many other things he needed to pay for. Once he was free of the guild, he'd see about getting so many coins he'd never have to wonder about something for long. I never had your curiosity, Tibs. I learned what I needed. I learned what I needed to know. I learned what I needed to accomplish my duties. If I realized I needed more information, I obtained it. But unlike you, I don't have a need to know everything. Not that I could, even if I did. Everything is much larger than you imagine. Tibs shrugged. I'm still going to try. A rogue with the knowledge of a scholar, Tibs mused. I suspect bards will be singing about you one day. Tibs groaned and his teacher motioned to the form who took a defensive position. Now, I want you to use what I had you practice to take your opponent down. Tibs made a thin knife out of ice and etched with it as he ran at the water creation. And that concludes chapter 41 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is up for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead, that is on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.